Picture, if you will, a world without green. No forests stretching to distant horizons, no meadows swaying in summer breezes, no single blade of grass beneath your feet. This was Earth for the first billion years of its existence, a molten sphere, spinning through the cosmic darkness, wrapped in toxic clouds that would kill any living thing we know today. 4.5 billion years ago, our planet was born from stellar dust and violence. Asteroids the size of mountains crashed into its surface with the force of 1,000 nuclear bombs. The very air, if you could call it air, would burn your lungs in an instant. Methane, ammonia, and hydrogen sulfide swirled through an atmosphere devoid of the oxygen we breathe. The surface glowed red-hot, a vision more hellish than any ancient mythology could imagine. For nearly 1 billion years nothing grew. Nothing green existed anywhere on Earth. But deep beneath the churning surface of primordial oceans, something extraordinary was stirring. In the crushing depths where sunlight never penetrated, simple cells were learning to survive. These were not the complex organisms we see today. They were barely more than bags of chemicals wrapped in primitive membranes. Yet within these microscopic pioneers lay the seeds of a revolution that would transform not just our planet, but the very nature of life itself. Consider the scale of what was about to unfold. These first cells, so small that millions could dance on the head of a pin, were about to change the color of an entire world. The secret they discovered, though discovery seems too grand a word for something so gradual, so patient, was photosynthesis. They learned to eat light itself. Imagine the profound simplicity of it, taking the energy streaming down from our young star and capturing it, storing it, using it to build the molecules of life. Water and carbon dioxide became their raw materials, sunlight became their power source, and oxygen, deadly, reactive. Oxygen became their waste product. These photosynthetic pioneers were cyanobacteria, and they were smaller than anything you can picture. If this period at the end of this sentence were Earth, a single cyanobacterium would be invisible even under the most powerful microscope. Yet these infinitesimal organisms were about to commit an act of planetary engineering that would dwarf any human achievement. The process they perfected is still, to this day, one of the most elegant chemical reactions in nature. Within their microscopic bodies, they built molecular machines, complexes of proteins and pigments that could split water molecules apart with surgical precision. They would steal electrons from water, use those electrons to build sugars from carbon dioxide, and discard oxygen as waste. It sounds simple when described this way, but the biochemistry involved is so sophisticated that human scientists are still trying to replicate it artificially. Picture these ancient seas, if you can. Imagine floating above shallow coastal waters 4 billion years ago. The water beneath you teems with trillions upon trillions of these green pioneers. They form vast mats that stretch beyond the horizon, living carpets of the first photosynthetic life. As the sun rises each morning, they begin their work. Molecule by molecule, they split water apart. Bubble by bubble, they release oxygen into the primordial atmosphere. At first, this oxygen vanished as quickly as it appeared. The early Earth was hungry for it. Iron dissolved in the oceans, rusted instantly when it encountered this reactive gas. For hundreds of millions of years, oxygen was consumed by chemical reactions as fast as the cyanobacteria could produce it. The evidence of this ancient struggle still lies beneath our feet today, in banded iron formations that record the epic battle between oxygen production and oxygen consumption. But the cyanobacteria were relentless. They had discovered the ultimate energy, source a star that would shine for billions of years. As long as the sun rose each day, they would continue their work. And gradually, over time spans that humble human imagination, they began to win. 2 billion years ago, something unprecedented happened. The oxygen they produced finally overwhelmed the Earth's ability to absorb it. For the first time in our planet's history, oxygen began to accumulate in the atmosphere. And this is where the story takes a dark turn, for oxygen, despite being essential to life as we know it today, was poison to almost everything alive at the time. The Great Oxidation Event, as scientists now call it, was the first mass extinction in Earth's history. Imagine the irony. The very organisms that would one day make complex life possible were destroying the world that existed before them. Anaerobic bacteria, those ancient life forms that had thrived in the oxygen-free world, began dying by the billions. Entire ecosystems collapsed. The chemistry of the oceans changed overnight in geological terms. But here is where life demonstrates its most remarkable quality, its ability to adapt. Some organisms learned to tolerate oxygen. Others went further. They learned to use it. They discovered that oxygen, for all its destructive power, could serve as a tremendously efficient tool for extracting energy from food. The very poison that killed their ancestors became their greatest asset. And so began the slow transformation of our world from red to blue. You see, for the first 2 billion years of Earth's history, our planet would have appeared red from space, the color of rust, of iron oxide, of a world still bleeding from its violent birth. But as oxygen accumulated in the atmosphere, something beautiful happened. The iron in the oceans rusted completely and settled to the bottom. The sky, cleared of the haze that had shrouded it for eons, turned blue for the first time. The stage was set for the next act in this planetary drama, but we are getting ahead of ourselves. The cyanobacteria had accomplished something that would echo through the ages, yet they remained locked in their aquatic world. The continent's vast, barren landscapes of rock and sand remained as lifeless as the day the Earth formed. No soil softened their edges, no roots split their stones, no green softened their harsh profiles. Yet even in these primordial seas, something was stirring that would prove crucial to the story ahead. The first stirrings of what we might generously call intelligence were beginning to emerge. These ancient organisms were learning to sense their environment in ways that seem almost impossibly sophisticated for such simple creatures. They could detect the angle of sunlight and adjust their position accordingly. They could sense changes in water chemistry and alter their behavior in response. They could communicate through chemical signals that carried information about food sources, dangers, and opportunities. These molecular messages, passed from cell to cell through the vast microbial communities, represented the earliest form of biological communication on Earth. Consider this for a moment. 4 billion years ago, while our planet was still a hostile alien world, microscopic organisms were already developing the fundamental processes that would one day give rise to the complex signaling networks we see in modern plants. They were learning to process information, to respond to their environment, to work together in ways that foreshadowed the collaborative intelligence we are only now beginning to understand in the plant kingdom. These cyanobacteria also began to experiment with different ways of living together. Some formed long chains, with specialized cells performing different functions. Others created layered communities where different species occupied different levels, each exploiting a particular niche in the environment. These early ecosystems, though microscopic, established patterns of cooperation and resource sharing that would eventually span continents. The oxygen they produced did more than just change the atmosphere. It fundamentally altered the possibilities for life on Earth. With oxygen available as an energy source, evolution could explore new forms of complexity. Cells could grow larger, develop internal structures, and eventually learn to work together in multicellular organisms. The foundation was being laid for every blade of grass, every towering tree, every delicate flower that would one day grace our planet. But perhaps most remarkably, these ancient organisms were also setting the stage for their own evolutionary descendants to leave the water entirely. For while they themselves remained aquatic, the oxygen they produced was gradually creating the conditions that would make terrestrial life possible. High in the atmosphere, Oxygen molecules were combining to form ozone, a protective shield that would eventually screen out the deadly ultraviolet radiation that sterilized the land surfaces. The story of how life learned to eat sunlight is also the story of how life learned to think, though we must use that word carefully when speaking of such ancient organisms. Yet the evidence is undeniable. These early photosynthetic pioneers developed sophisticated mechanisms for processing information about their environment and responding appropriately. They could track daily and seasonal cycles, coordinate their activities with neighbors, and even prepare for future changes in their environment. What we are witnessing in those primordial seas is the birth of biological intelligence, not the brain-based intelligence we recognize in animals, but something perhaps more fundamental, the ability of living systems to gather information, process it, and use it to make decisions that enhance survival. This plant-like intelligence, distributed through communities rather than centralized in brains, would prove to be one of the most successful strategies in the history of life. And so, as we look back across 4 billion years of history, we see that the transformation of Earth from a red, lifeless world to the blue-green paradise we know today began with the humblest of origins. Microscopic organisms, floating in ancient seas, learning to capture sunlight and transform it into the chemical energy of life. Their legacy surrounds us still. Every breath you take contains oxygen produced by their descendants. Every green thing you see, from the mightiest redwood to the smallest moss, carries on the work they began. The very atmosphere that protects us was crafted by countless generations of these photosynthetic pioneers. But their greatest achievement may have been something even more profound. They demonstrated that life, given time and opportunity, could reshape an entire planet. They proved that cooperation and persistence could overcome seemingly impossible odds. They showed that intelligence, the ability to sense, respond, and adapt, was not something that required a brain, but rather something that could emerge from the patient work of countless simple organisms acting in concert. The stage was now set for the next great adventure in the story of plant intelligence, the conquest of land itself. For while the cyanobacteria had transformed the seas and the atmosphere, the continents remained untouched, waiting for life brave enough to leave the protective embrace of water and venture into the unknown territories above the waves. The greatest expedition in the history of life was about to begin. 450 million years ago, if you could have stood on any shoreline on Earth, you would have witnessed one of the most desolate landscapes imaginable. Stretch your vision as far as the eye could see, endless expanses of naked rock baking under a sun more intense than anything we experience today. No soil cushioned the harsh stone, no shade offered respite from the relentless radiation. The very air shimmered with ultraviolet light that would kill most living things in minutes. This was the world that awaited life's greatest pioneers. For billions of years, life had flourished in the protective embrace of water. The oceans teemed with countless organisms, from microscopic cyanobacteria to the first complex cells that had learned to work together. But the land remained utterly barren, a hostile frontier that might as well have been another planet. Yet in the shallow coastal waters, something remarkable was stirring. Green organisms, unlike anything that had come before, were gathering their evolutionary courage for the most audacious expedition in the history of life, the conquest of land itself. Picture these first would-be terrestrial colonists. They were barely tall enough to cover a coin, simple plants that today we might mistake for pond scum or overlook entirely among the rocks. But within their humble forms lay an ambition that would reshape the face of our planet. They were about to attempt something no life form had ever achieved, leaving the safety of water to establish permanent settlements on dry land. The challenges they faced were staggering. Consider what it means to leave water when your entire evolutionary history has been aquatic. Water provides support for your body, delivers nutrients directly to every cell, protects you from temperature extremes, and shields you from deadly radiation. Remove water, and you face immediate catastrophe on multiple fronts. First, there was the problem of support. In water, even the simplest organism can float effortlessly, but on land, gravity becomes a merciless force that crushes anything without structure. These pioneer plants had to reinvent their bodies from the ground up, developing rigid cell walls and supportive tissues that could hold them upright against gravity's pull. Then came the challenge of obtaining water in a world where it no longer surrounded them. Every breeze threatened to steal moisture from their tissues. Every moment under the sun meant potential desiccation. They needed to develop strategies for finding water, storing it, and preventing its loss, all while maintaining the delicate chemistry of life within their cells. But perhaps most daunting of all was the radiation. Without water's protective filter, cosmic rays and ultraviolet light bombarded everything on the surface. This radiation could shatter the delicate molecules of life, scrambling genetic codes and destroying cellular machinery. Any organism brave enough to venture onto land needed protection from this invisible assault. Yet the early land plants did more than merely survive these challenges. They turned them into opportunities. Watch how they solved the problem of support. They invented lignin, a complex organic polymer that provided structural strength while remaining lightweight. This miraculous material, which we still use today in the form of wood, allowed plants to build bodies that could stand tall while remaining flexible enough to bend with the wind. For water procurement, they developed the most sophisticated mining operation in natural history. The first roots were nothing like the massive anchoring systems we see in modern trees. They were delicate, hair-like structures that explored the tiny cracks and crevices in solid rock, searching for any trace of moisture. But these roots carried a secret weapon. They could produce acids stronger than vinegar, chemicals that could dissolve rock itself and liberate the minerals locked within. Imagine the patience required for this process. Grain by grain, these pioneer plants began breaking down mountains. Drop by drop, they extracted water from seemingly dry stone. They were the original alchemists, transforming solid rock into the first soil our planet had ever known. To protect themselves from radiation, they developed waxy coatings, natural sunscreens that reflected harmful rays while sealing in precious moisture. They created internal plumbing systems more sophisticated than any human engineering, with specialized cells that could transport water and nutrients from their roots to their furthest extremities. These vascular systems represented a revolution in biological engineering, allowing plants to grow larger and more complex while maintaining precise control over their internal environment. But perhaps their most remarkable innovation was learning to reproduce on land. In water, reproduction is simple. You release your genetic material and let the currents carry it to potential partners. On land, this strategy fails completely. The first land plants had to invent entirely new ways of bringing together the ingredients for the next generation. They developed spores, microscopic capsules containing genetic material, wrapped in protective coatings that could survive the harsh conditions of terrestrial travel. Some plants created elaborate launching mechanisms, catapults that could fire spores incredible distances. Others learned to exploit the wind, timing their releases to catch favorable air currents that would carry their offspring to new territories. Within 50 million years, a blink of an eye in geological terms, these botanical pioneers had achieved the impossible. They transformed barren continents into thriving green worlds. Where once there had been only naked rock, forests now stretched to the horizon. But these were forests unlike anything we see today. Picture, if you will, the Coal Age forests of 300 million years ago. Club mosses, relatives of the tiny ground-hugging plants you might find in modern forests, grew to heights of 300 feet. Their trunks, thick as oil barrels, supported canopies that blocked out the sun for lesser plants below. Giant horsetails, now reduced to humble wetland weeds, stood tall as modern pine trees, their jointed stems reaching skyward like living bamboo scaffolding. In these ancient forests, dragonflies soared with wingspans that rivaled eagles. The very air was different, richer in oxygen than anything we breathe today, supporting insects of impossible size and enabling plants to grow to fantastic proportions. The atmosphere itself had become a greenhouse, warm and humid from pole to pole, creating conditions where plants could thrive in every corner of the earth. But these magnificent forests held secrets that scientists would not discover for millions of years. Deep within their root systems, the first experiments in plant cooperation were taking place. Even these ancient plants were learning to work together, sharing resources and information in ways that foreshadowed the complex partnerships we observe in modern ecosystems. They developed the first crude forms of chemical communication, releasing molecular messages into the soil that could warn neighbors of dangers or signal the availability of resources. Some plants began forming partnerships with fungi, trading nutrients in exchanges that benefited both partners. These early alliances laid the groundwork for the vast underground networks that would eventually connect entire forests in webs of mutual support. The transformation of land by these early plants created the foundation for everything that followed. They generated the first substantial soil deposits, accumulating organic matter that would support countless future generations of life. They moderated the climate, creating localized weather patterns through their transpiration and providing shade that allowed other organisms to venture onto land. Most importantly, they began sequestering vast amounts of carbon from the atmosphere. As they grew and died and were buried in swampy conditions, they locked away carbon that had previously existed as atmospheric carbon dioxide. Over millions of years, these buried forests would become the coal deposits that would later fuel human civilization, hence our name for this period, the Carboniferous. But even as these ancient plants were reshaping the physical environment of Earth, they were also pioneering forms of intelligence that we are only now beginning to understand. Freed from the constraints of aquatic life, they could explore new ways of sensing and responding to their environment. They learned to track the sun's movement across the sky with mathematical precision, adjusting their growth to optimize light capture throughout the day and across the seasons. They developed root systems that could map the underground landscape with extraordinary accuracy, locating water sources and avoiding obstacles with the skill of experienced navigators. Most remarkably, they began to exhibit behaviors that suggested a form of environmental memory. They could remember the location of resources, returning to productive areas year after year. They could anticipate seasonal changes, preparing for winter months before the first frost appeared. They demonstrated the ability to learn from experience, adjusting their growth strategies based on past successes and failures. Consider the implications of these developments. Here were organisms without brains, without nervous systems as we understand them, yet displaying behaviors that we would readily recognize as intelligent if we observed them in animals. They were making decisions, solving problems, and adapting their strategies based on environmental feedback. The colonization of land also marked the beginning of plant architecture as we know it. In water, plants could adopt almost any shape, supported by the medium around them. But on land, the laws of physics imposed new constraints and opened new possibilities. Plants had to learn the principles of engineering, how to build structures that could support their own weight while remaining flexible enough to survive storms. They invented the concept of the tree trunk, a central column strong, enough to lift tons of living tissue high into the air, while remaining light enough to avoid collapsing under its own weight. They developed branching patterns that could distribute resources efficiently while maximizing exposure to sunlight. They created root systems that could anchor massive structures while exploring vast volumes of soil for resources. These engineering solutions were not the product of conscious design, but of countless experiments over millions of years, with successful innovations preserved and refined through natural selection. Yet the results demonstrate a sophistication that rivals human engineering, achieved through patient trial and error across geological timescales. As we look back at this great land rush, we see that it established patterns that continue to this day. The basic body plans developed by these early terrestrial plants, roots for resource acquisition, stems for support and transport, leaves for photosynthesis, remain the fundamental architecture of plant life. The cooperative relationships they pioneered with fungi and other organisms have evolved into the complex ecological networks that sustain modern ecosystems. Most importantly, these ancient pioneers demonstrated that intelligence, the ability to sense, process information, and respond adaptively to environmental challenges need not require a centralized brain. They showed that intelligence could be distributed throughout an organism, emerging from the coordinated activities of countless individual cells working together toward common goals. The conquest of land was more than a simple expansion of life's territory. It was a revolution in how life could organize itself, how organisms could process information, and how living systems could reshape their environment. The plants that made this transition were not merely survivors, they were innovators, pioneers, and the architects of the green world we inhabit today. But their greatest achievement still lay ahead. For while they had successfully established themselves on land, they had only begun to explore the possibilities that their new environment offered. The next chapters in their story would reveal even more sophisticated forms of plant intelligence and cooperation, discoveries that would challenge our very understanding of what it means to be intelligent, to communicate, and to thrive in a complex and ever-changing world. In the summer of 1859, a gentleman naturalist named Charles Darwin published a book that would forever change how humanity understood its place in the natural world. On the Origin of Species sent shockwaves through Victorian society, challenging the very foundations of how we viewed life itself. But what few people knew, what Darwin himself kept largely hidden from public view, was that his most revolutionary discoveries were not about animals at all. They were about plants. For 30 years, in the quiet sanctuary of his greenhouse at Down House, Darwin had been conducting experiments that would have seemed almost mystical to his contemporaries. He was watching plants move, respond, and behave in ways that suggested they possessed something remarkably similar to animal intelligence. His observations were so extraordinary, so far ahead of their time, that when he finally published them in his last book, The Power of Movement in Plants, the scientific community largely ignored them. History would prove Darwin right, but it would take more than a century for science to catch up with his vision. Picture Darwin in his greenhouse, bent over his experimental subjects with the patience of a devoted teacher. He has rigged elaborate contraptions to measure plant movements invisible to the naked eye. Tiny glass beads glued to growing tips catch the light, their movements traced on smoked glass plates. What he discovers challenges everything Victorian science believes about the nature of life and intelligence. He watches. Climbing vines reach toward supports they cannot possibly see, their growing tips sweeping through the air in precise geometric patterns until they encounter something to grasp. He observes how plant roots navigate through soil like animals searching for food, actively exploring their environment and making decisions about which direction to grow based on information gathered through their tips. Most remarkably, he documents how plants track the sun with mathematical precision, their flowers and leaves adjusting their orientation throughout the day to optimize light capture. This is not the simple mechanical response that his contemporaries imagine. It is sophisticated behavior that requires the plant to process information about time, position, and optimal energy collection. Darwin's experiments reveal that the growing tips of plants, what he calls their brains, can sense gravity, light, moisture, and chemical gradients with extraordinary sensitivity. When he removes these tips, the plants lose their ability to respond appropriately to their environment. When he covers them with tiny caps, their navigation abilities disappear. He concludes that plants possess distributed intelligence, with their root tips serving as command centers for behavior as complex as anything seen in the animal kingdom. But Darwin is not alone in his discoveries. Around the world, other naturalists are venturing into Earth's most remote corners, collecting plants and documenting behaviors that seem to defy explanation. Their expeditions read like adventures from the age of exploration, filled with discoveries that challenge the boundaries between the plant and animal kingdoms. In the steaming jungles of the Amazon, botanist Richard Spruce spends 15 years documenting phenomena that will not be understood for another century. He observes trees that seem to coordinate their flowering across impossible distances, entire species blooming simultaneously across thousands of miles of rainforest, as if responding to some invisible signal that connects them all. Spruce describes stranger things still, plants that seem to recognize the approach of specific insects, preparing their defenses before any attack begins. Vines that appear to communicate with their host trees, somehow negotiating the terms of their partnership through chemical exchanges he can detect but not understand. Trees that alter their growth patterns in response to the needs of their neighbors, creating forest canopies so perfectly interwoven that they seem to function as single, vast organisms. In the high mountains of Tibet, plant collectors brave altitude sickness and freezing temperatures to document species that survive in conditions that would kill most life on Earth. They find plants that produce their own antifreeze, chemical compounds that prevent ice crystals from forming in their tissues even at temperatures of -40 degrees Celsius. These botanical mountaineers have learned to read weather patterns days in advance, preparing for storms by altering their metabolism and withdrawing essential fluids to protected locations within their bodies. Each expedition reveals new mysteries about plant abilities that seem almost supernatural. Desert botanists document cacti that can predict rainfall weeks before clouds appear on the horizon, slowly mobilizing their water storage systems in preparation for the deluge to come. Arctic researchers observe plants that remain active beneath snow for months at a time, somehow maintaining communication networks that allow them to coordinate their spring emergence with pinpoint timing. But perhaps the most shocking discoveries come from tropical explorers who document plants engaged in what can only be described as warfare. They find species that manufacture chemical weapons specifically designed to poison their competitors, others that recruit animal allies to fight their battles, and still others that engage in forms of biological espionage, eavesdropping on their neighbors' chemical communications and using that intelligence to gain competitive advantages. These early naturalists are witnessing the first glimpses of plant intelligence, but they lack the tools to understand the mechanisms behind what they observe. They can document the behaviors, but the underlying biology remains hidden from them. It will take the development of modern technology to reveal the sophisticated systems that make these plant abilities possible. The breakthrough begins in the 1970s, when researchers first attach sensitive electrodes to living plants. What they discover sends shockwaves through the scientific community. Plants generate electrical signals remarkably similar to the action potentials that carry information through animal nervous systems. Dr. J.C. Bose, working in India, demonstrates that plants respond to electrical stimulation, mechanical shock, and even musical vibrations, with measurable changes in their bioelectric activity. His experiments show that plants can be anesthetized with chloroform, that they exhibit something analogous to fatigue when repeatedly stimulated, and that they can recover from injury in ways that mirror animal healing responses. American researchers take these discoveries further, using advanced recording equipment to map the electrical activity within plant tissues. They discover that when a plant is injured in one location, electrical signals race through its body at speeds of 1 centimeter per second, alerting distant tissues to begin producing defensive compounds. This plant nervous system operates without neurons, without a brain, yet it coordinates responses across the entire organism with remarkable efficiency. The electrical signals are just the beginning. Scientists soon discover that plants use a sophisticated array of chemical messengers to communicate both within their own bodies and with other organisms in their environment. They, to produce hormones that coordinate growth and development, much like the hormonal systems that regulate animal behavior. But they also manufacture compounds that serve as external communication molecules, chemical words and sentences that carry complex information between individuals. Modern analytical techniques reveal the staggering complexity of plant chemical vocabulary. A single tree can produce hundreds of different volatile compounds, each carrying specific information about the tree's health, its nutritional status, its defensive preparations, or its reproductive readiness. These chemical messages drift through the air, creating an invisible landscape of information that plants use to monitor their environment and coordinate their activities. But the most remarkable discovery is yet to come. Plants can learn. Controlled experiments demonstrate that plants can modify their behavior based on experience, retaining information about past events, and using that knowledge to improve their responses to future challenges. They exhibit habituation, gradually reducing their response to repeated harmless stimuli. They show sensitization, becoming more reactive to threatening situations after experiencing danger. Some species even demonstrate what appears to be associative learning, linking previously neutral stimuli with significant events and responding appropriately when those stimuli are encountered again. These discoveries force scientists to reconsider fundamental assumptions about the nature of intelligence. Here are organisms without brains, without nervous systems as we traditionally understand them, yet displaying sophisticated information processing abilities that rival those of many animals. They can perceive their environment through multiple sensory modalities, integrate complex information from various sources, and modify their behavior based on experience and learning. The implications extend far beyond botany. If plants can exhibit intelligent behavior without centralized processing systems, what does this tell us about the nature of intelligence itself? Perhaps intelligence is not something that requires a brain, but rather an emergent property of complex information processing systems, regardless of their physical organization. Consider the revolutionary nature of these discoveries. For centuries, humans had drawn a clear line between the plant and animal kingdoms, relegating plants to the role of passive, mechanical organisms that simply responded to environmental stimuli in predictable ways. The revelation that plants actively perceive, process information, make decisions, and learn from experience fundamentally challenges this worldview. It suggests that intelligence, the ability to gather, process, and act upon information in adaptive ways, may be far more widespread in nature than we ever imagined. It hints at forms of consciousness and awareness that operate according to principles we are only beginning to understand, and it raises profound questions about our relationship with the natural world and our responsibilities toward other forms of life. Darwin himself seemed to grasp the revolutionary implications of his plant research. In private correspondence, he wrote that the tip of a plant root acts like the brain of one of the lower animals. He understood that his observations challenged the very foundations of how his era understood life and intelligence, but he also recognized that science was not yet ready to accept such radical ideas. Today, more than a century after Darwin's death, we are finally beginning to appreciate the full scope of his vision. Advanced imaging techniques allow us to peer inside plant cells and watch the molecular machinery of intelligence in action. Genetic analysis reveals the evolutionary relationships between plant and animal information processing systems. Sophisticated behavioral experiments demonstrate the remarkable complexity of plant cognition, decision-making. Yet even as our understanding grows, the mysteries deepen. Each answer leads to new questions about the nature of plant experience, the extent of their awareness, and the possibility that forms of consciousness exist throughout the natural world that we have barely begun to comprehend. The plant hunters of the 19th and early 20th centuries opened a door to a hidden world of botanical intelligence that continues to astonish us today. Their expeditions to remote corners of the earth revealed that plants are not the passive, unthinking organisms we once believed them to be, but rather sophisticated information processing systems capable of perception, learning, and adaptive behavior. As we stand on the threshold of even greater discoveries about plant intelligence, we owe a debt to these early explorers who dared to look beyond conventional wisdom and document the impossible. Their careful observations laid the foundation for our modern understanding of plant cognition and opened our eyes to the remarkable intelligence that has been surrounding us all along, hidden in plain sight in every garden, every forest, and every wild place where plants grow. The stage is now set for even more remarkable revelations about the secret lives of plants, discoveries that will challenge everything we think we know about intelligence, consciousness, and the nature of life itself. Beneath your feet, as you walk through any forest, lies a hidden world more intricate and interconnected than the most sophisticated computer network humanity has ever built. For most of human history, we believed that trees were solitary creatures, competing ruthlessly with one another for sunlight, water, and nutrients in a botanical version of survival of the fittest. We could not have been more wrong. The truth, when it was finally revealed, would revolutionize our understanding of how forests work, how plants communicate, and what it truly means to be intelligent in the natural world. The story of this discovery begins with a young forest ecologist named Suzanne Simard, working in the ancient forests of British Columbia in the 1990s. Armed with scientific curiosity and radioactive carbon tracers, she was about to overturn centuries of botanical thinking with a single, elegant experiment. Picture the scene: towering Douglas firs and delicate paper birches sharing the same forest floor, their roots intermingling in the dark soil below. Traditional forestry science insisted these species were fierce competitors, each fighting to monopolize the limited resources available in their shared environment. But Simard suspected something far more remarkable was taking place. She designed an experiment of breathtaking simplicity. She would inject carbon dioxide enriched with radioactive carbon into the air around paper birch saplings, then track where that carbon ended up. If trees were truly solitary organisms, the radioactive carbon should remain within the birch trees that absorbed it. But if something more complex was happening underground, the carbon might travel to places conventional science said it could never go. What she discovered changed everything. Within hours of injecting the radioactive carbon dioxide, she could detect it, not only in the birch saplings that had absorbed it, but also in nearby Douglas fir trees. The carbon was moving underground, traveling through an invisible network that connected trees separated by dozens of meters. Two species supposedly locked in mortal competition were actually sharing resources, communicating and cooperating in ways that defied every assumption about forest ecology. The mechanism behind this miraculous exchange lay in one of nature's most ancient partnerships: the relationship between plant roots and fungi. For hundreds of millions of years, since plants first colonized land, they have formed intimate alliances with soil fungi in arrangements that benefit both partners. The fungi receive sugar and other nutrients from the plants, while providing the plants with water, minerals, and protection from pathogens. But Simard's research revealed that these partnerships were far more sophisticated than anyone had imagined. The fungal networks weren't just connecting individual plants to individual fungi, they were linking entire forests in vast, interconnected webs of communication and resource sharing. Picture, if you will, the true architecture of a forest floor. Beneath the visible world of tree trunks and undergrowth lies an intricate three-dimensional network of fungal threads, called hyphae, that extend through the soil like the finest silk. These threads are so delicate they can only be seen under powerful microscopes, yet they are so numerous that a single teaspoon of forest soil may contain fungal filaments that, if laid end to end, would stretch for miles. Individual fungal networks can span hundreds of acres, connecting trees of the same species and even forming bridges between entirely different species. A single fungal organism may link dozens or even hundreds of trees, creating biological networks that dwarf any human city in their complexity and sophistication. Through these fungal highways, forests engage in commerce that would make any economist marvel. Trees trade resources based on supply and demand, with individuals who have surplus nutrients sharing with neighbors who are struggling. During periods of drought, water flows through the network, from trees with deep roots to those suffering from water stress. When one tree is attacked by insects, it can broadcast chemical warnings through the fungal network, alerting its neighbors to begin producing defensive compounds before the threat reaches them. But perhaps most remarkably, the network exhibits what can only be described as intelligence in how it allocates resources. Mother trees, large, mature individuals at the center of the network actively nurture their offspring, channeling extra nutrients to young saplings struggling to establish themselves in the dim understory. These forest matriarchs can recognize their own genetic offspring and provide them with preferential treatment, increasing their chances of survival in the competitive forest environment. The sophistication of this underground economy becomes even more apparent when we consider how the network responds to threats and opportunities. When a tree is dying, it often downloads its resources into the fungal network, ensuring that its accumulated nutrients will benefit the forest community rather than being lost. Young trees plug into the network as soon as their roots are large enough, gaining immediate access to the forest's collective resources and communication systems. Seasonal patterns reveal another layer of complexity in these underground relationships. In autumn, as deciduous trees prepare for winter dormancy, they pump excess sugars into the fungal network, where they can be stored and redistributed to evergreen species that remain active throughout the winter months. Come spring, this flow reverses, with evergreens sharing their early-season photosynthetic products with deciduous trees that are just beginning to leaf out. The communication aspects of these networks prove equally sophisticated. Trees use the fungal connections to share information about environmental conditions, threats, and opportunities throughout the forest. Chemical signals travel through the network at measurable speeds, allowing trees to coordinate their responses to everything from insect attacks to changes in weather patterns. Research has revealed that these chemical messages are remarkably specific. Trees can identify the source of different types of threats and adjust their defensive responses accordingly. They can distinguish between damage caused by browsing animals and that caused by insect pests, producing different cocktails of defensive compounds, appropriate to each situation. They can even anticipate threats, beginning their defensive preparations when they receive warning signals from neighbors under attack. The speed and efficiency of information transfer through these biological networks rivals that of human communication systems. Some chemical signals can travel through the fungal connections at rates that allow trees separated by hundreds of meters to coordinate their responses within hours. This distributed processing power enables forests to respond to threats and opportunities as unified superorganisms rather than collections of competing individuals. Consider the implications of these discoveries for our understanding of plant intelligence. Here we see forests engaging in complex information processing, resource allocation, and collective decision-making that emerges from the interactions of countless individual organisms. No single tree controls the network, yet the system as a whole exhibits sophisticated adaptive behaviors that benefit the entire forest community. This distributed intelligence operates according to principles that computer scientists are only beginning to appreciate. Like the Internet itself, the forest network has no central control system, yet it efficiently routes information and resources to where they are needed most. It exhibits redundancy and resilience, continuing to function even when individual connections are severed. And it demonstrates emergent properties capabilities that arise from the network as a whole that exceed the sum of its individual components. The economic parallels are equally striking. Forest networks engage in complex resource trading that includes not only the exchange of basic nutrients, but also more sophisticated transactions. Trees may trade current resources for future benefits, investing in relationships that will pay dividends during times of stress. Some species serve as resource banks, storing nutrients during abundant times and redistributing them during periods of scarcity. The networks also exhibit something resembling a form of forest healthcare system. When trees are damaged or diseased, neighboring individuals often increase their support, providing extra resources to help their struggling partners recover. Healthy trees may sacrifice some of their own growth to maintain the welfare of the network as a whole, recognizing that their long-term survival depends on the health of the forest community. Recent research has revealed even more remarkable aspects of these underground networks. Scientists have discovered that different fungal species create networks with different characteristics. Some specialize in rapid information transfer, others in long-term resource storage, and still others in connecting diverse plant species across large distances. Forests may contain multiple overlapping networks, each serving different functions in the forest economy. The networks also demonstrate memory and learning capabilities. Trees that have experienced stress in the past may maintain stronger connections to the fungal network, ensuring they have better access to community resources during future challenges. Networks can adapt their architecture over time, strengthening useful connections and allowing less valuable pathways to fade away. Perhaps most intriguingly, research suggests that these networks may extend far beyond what we can currently measure or understand. Some scientists propose that fungal networks might connect forests across vast landscapes, creating continent-spanning communication systems that allow plant communities to share information about climate patterns, resource availability, and environmental changes across biogeographic regions. As we begin to appreciate the true scope and sophistication of these underground networks, we are forced to reconsider fundamental assumptions about how forests function and what it means for plants to be intelligent. The discovery of the Wood Wide Web reveals that forests are not collections of competing individuals, but rather complex, collaborative communities that exhibit forms of collective intelligence rivaling anything in the animal kingdom. This revelation has profound implications for how we understand plant cognition and consciousness. If individual trees can be compared to neurons in a vast biological network, then forests might be considered the plant kingdom's equivalent of brains' distributed processing systems, capable of complex computation, memory formation, and adaptive decision-making. The underground internet of the forest also challenges us to expand our conception of what constitutes communication and intelligence in the natural world. These networks demonstrate that sophisticated information processing and collective behavior can emerge from systems that operate according to principles very different from those we see in animal nervous systems. As we continue to explore these hidden networks, we are discovering that the natural world contains forms of intelligence and communication that we are only beginning to understand. The fungal networks that connect our forests represent just one example of the sophisticated biological systems that have been operating beneath our notice for millions of years, quietly demonstrating that intelligence, cooperation, and communication are far more widespread in nature than we ever imagined. The Wood Wide Web stands as testament to the power of collaboration and the remarkable capabilities that emerge when living systems work together toward common goals. It reminds us that the natural world still holds countless secrets waiting to be discovered, and that our understanding of life, intelligence, and consciousness continues to evolve as we uncover the hidden connections that bind all living things together. In laboratories around the world, a quiet revolution is taking place. Scientists armed with high-speed cameras, sensitive measuring instruments, and unprecedented patience are documenting behaviors in plants that challenge our most fundamental assumptions about the nature of intelligence itself. What they are discovering reads like science fiction, yet it is grounded in rigorous experimentation and careful observation. Plants, it turns out, can learn. They can remember. And they can do all of this without possessing anything remotely resembling a brain. The story begins with one of the most elegant experiments in modern plant science, conducted by researcher Monica Gagliano in Australia. Her subject was the humble mimosa plant, that shy performer of the botanical world known for its leaves that snap shut at the slightest touch. For generations, scientists had dismissed this behavior as nothing more than a simple mechanical response, no different from a mousetrap closing when triggered. Gagliano suspected there was far more to the story. She designed an experiment of beautiful simplicity. She would drop mimosa plants repeatedly from a height of 15 centimeters, causing them to experience a harmless but startling stimulus that triggered their defensive leaf-folding response. If the plants were truly just mechanical systems, they should continue folding their leaves with each drop, showing no change in behavior over time. But that is not what happened. After just a few drops, the plants began to ignore the stimulus entirely. They had learned that the falling sensation, while startling, posed no actual threat. More remarkably still, they retained this learned response for 28 days without any additional practice, demonstrating a form of memory that persisted far longer than many animals can maintain learned behaviors. This was not habituation, in the simple sense that scientists had previously understood it. The plants were making sophisticated judgments about their environment, distinguishing between harmless and threatening stimuli, and modifying their behavior based on experience. They were learning in the truest sense of the word, but Gagliano's discoveries were just the beginning. Across the globe, other researchers were documenting plant behaviors that seemed to require forms of cognition we had never imagined possible in organisms without nervous systems. In Israel, scientists observed garden pea plants navigating complex three-dimensional mazes to reach water sources. The plants would explore multiple pathways simultaneously, sending root branches down different routes until they located their goal. Most remarkably, once they had found the optimal path, they would concentrate their growth along that route while abandoning less efficient alternatives. They were demonstrating spatial learning and problem-solving abilities that would impress any animal behaviorist. The pea plants showed even more sophisticated capabilities when researchers made the task more challenging. When scientists moved water sources after the plants had learned their locations, the plants adapted quickly, exploring new areas and updating their spatial maps of the environment. They could remember the locations of multiple water sources and choose between them based on factors like distance, concentration, and accessibility. Time-lapse photography reveals the hidden world of plant movement that unfolds too slowly for human perception. Plants are constantly in motion, exploring their environment with purposeful, coordinated behaviors that bear striking resemblances to animal foraging strategies. They reach toward resources, retreat from threats, and navigate around obstacles with a grace and intelligence that becomes apparent only when their movements are accelerated for human viewing. Watch a climbing vine search for support, and you witness behavior that seems almost deliberate in its purposefulness. The growing tip sweeps through the air in precise geometric patterns, methodically exploring the three-dimensional space around. Tame it until it encounters something suitable to grasp. Once contact is made, the plant rapidly reorganizes its growth to secure the attachment and begins climbing with remarkable efficiency. But perhaps most shocking of all is the discovery that plants can recognize their relatives and behave differently toward genetic family members than toward strangers. Research has shown that many plant species grow more cooperatively when their neighbors are closely related, sharing resources more freely and competing less aggressively for territory and nutrients. This kin recognition operates through chemical signals that allow plants to assess the genetic similarity of their neighbors. Plants can detect these molecular signatures in their environment and adjust their behavior accordingly, demonstrating a form of social intelligence that rivals that of many animal species. The mechanisms underlying these remarkable abilities are finally beginning to come to light through advances in plant neurobiology. a field that did not exist until recently because scientists assumed plants had no neurological systems to study. What researchers are discovering is that plants have evolved information processing systems that, while very different from animal nervous systems, are equally sophisticated in their capabilities. Plant cells can generate electrical signals identical in many ways to the action potentials that carry information through animal nervous systems. These electrical impulses travel through plant tissues at measurable speeds, coordinating responses across the entire organism. When a leaf is damaged by an insect, electrical signals race through the plant's vascular system, alerting distant tissues to begin producing defensive compounds. The speed and specificity of these responses suggest information processing capabilities that require more than simple chemical reactions. Plants can distinguish between different types of threats and mount appropriate responses within minutes or even seconds of detecting danger. They can integrate information from multiple sources, light levels, temperature, humidity, chemical signals from neighbors, and coordinate complex behavioral responses based on this environmental assessment. Recent research has revealed that plants manufacture neurotransmitter chemicals identical to those used by animal nervous systems. Dopamine, serotonin, and other molecules associated with animal cognition and emotion have been found in plant tissues, often in concentrations comparable to those found in animal brains. While we cannot yet say definitively what role these chemicals play in plant behavior, their presence suggests that the biochemical basis of information processing may be more universal than previously imagined. Plants also demonstrate decision-making abilities that seem to require weighing multiple factors and choosing optimal strategies from available alternatives. When faced with competing demands for resources such as allocating energy between growth and defense, or between root development and leaf production, plants consistently make choices that maximize their long-term survival prospects. These decisions are not random or mechanistic, but appear to be based on sophisticated risk assessment and resource optimization algorithms that rival those used in artificial intelligence systems. Plants can evaluate trade-offs, assess probabilities, and choose strategies that balance immediate needs against future uncertainties. Consider the remarkable foraging behavior exhibited by many plant species. Roots exploring soil for nutrients demonstrate search patterns that mirror the optimal foraging strategies used by animals. They concentrate their efforts in productive areas while systematically exploring new territories, balancing exploitation of known resources against exploration for better opportunities. When researchers place nutrients in patches throughout a plant's root zone, the plants quickly learn to predict where food is most likely to be found. They develop search images for productive environments and modify their exploration patterns based on past success rates in different types of soil conditions. Perhaps most intriguingly, plants appear capable of what can only be described as anticipatory behavior. They can prepare for future events based on environmental cues that predict changing conditions. Desert plants begin mobilizing their drought responses weeks before the dry season arrives, reading subtle signals in day length, temperature patterns, and humidity that forecast coming water stress. Deciduous trees begin preparing for winter months before the first frost, gradually withdrawing nutrients from their leaves and strengthening their cold-resistant tissues in response to decreasing daylight hours. This anticipatory behavior requires the plants to maintain internal calendars that track seasonal progression and coordinate their physiology with predicted future conditions. The discovery of plant learning and memory capabilities raises profound questions about the nature of consciousness and experience in the botanical world. If plants can learn from experience, retain memories, and make decisions based on assessments of their environment, what does this tell us about their subjective experience of the world? Recent experiments have even suggested that plants may be capable of associative learning, the ability to link previously neutral stimuli with significant events and respond appropriately when those stimuli are encountered in the future. This type of learning, long considered a hallmark of animal intelligence, appears to be within the capabilities of organisms we have traditionally viewed as passive and unresponsive. Some researchers have proposed that plants may experience something analogous to emotions, with their behavior influenced by internal states that could be compared to moods or feelings. While this remains highly speculative, the discovery that plants produce many of the same neurotransmitter chemicals associated with animal emotions suggests that the boundaries between plant and animal experience may be less clear-cut than we have assumed. The implications of these discoveries extend far beyond botany. If intelligence can emerge from distributed biological networks rather than centralized brains, what does this tell us about the nature of consciousness itself? Perhaps intelligence is not something that requires a specific type of neural architecture, but rather an emergent property of complex information processing systems, regardless of their physical organization. These revelations about plant cognition also challenge us to reconsider our ethical relationships with the natural world. If plants can learn, remember, and potentially experience their environment in ways that matter to them, how should this change our attitudes toward forest conservation, agricultural practices, and environmental stewardship? The study of plant intelligence is still in its infancy, but already it has revolutionized our understanding of life's capabilities. We are discovering that intelligence, in various forms, may be far more widespread in nature than we ever imagined. The plants around us in our gardens, our forests, and our wild places are not the passive mechanical organisms we once believed them to be. They are information processors, decision-makers, learners, and rememberers. They are participants in complex communication networks that span ecosystems. They are, in their own remarkable way, intelligent beings whose cognitive capabilities we are only beginning to appreciate and understand. As we continue to explore the mysteries of plant intelligence, we are uncovering new forms of cognition that challenge our assumptions about what it means to think, to learn, and to be aware in this world. The green minds that surround us hold secrets about the nature of intelligence that may ultimately help us understand our own consciousness and our place in the larger community of life on Earth. High above the Amazon rainforest, satellites equipped with the most sophisticated sensors humanity has ever built are detecting something extraordinary. Invisible to the naked eye, chemical conversations are taking place across thousands of square kilometers of jungle canopy. Trees separated by vast distances are coordinating their responses to threats, sharing information about insect outbreaks, and mounting collective defenses that span entire river basins. We are finally learning to eavesdrop on conversations that have been taking place for millions of years. The technology that has made this possible represents a revolution in our ability to understand the hidden world of plant communication. What we are discovering challenges everything we thought we knew about how forests function, how plants share information, and what it truly means to live as part of an interconnected biological community. Picture the scale of what these satellites are detecting. When an outbreak of leaf-eating caterpillars begins in one section of forest, trees under attack release chemical alarm signals into the atmosphere. These airborne messengers drift on wind currents across the canopy, alerting distant trees to begin producing defensive compounds before the insects reach them. The satellite sensors can detect these chemical plumes as they spread across hundreds of kilometers, mapping the real-time communication networks that connect entire ecosystems. But the satellites reveal only the largest scale of plant communication. On the ground, molecular biologists are using advanced analytical techniques to decode the sophisticated chemical languages that plants use to share information with their neighbors, their symbionts, and even their enemies. The vocabulary they have uncovered is staggering in its complexity and precision. A single tree can produce over 700 different volatile chemical compounds, each carrying specific information about the tree's condition, its needs, its threats, or its opportunities. These chemical words combine into molecular sentences that convey complex messages about everything from soil conditions to pest pressures to seasonal changes. Consider the elegant precision of this botanical communication system. When a plant is attacked by aphids, it releases one specific cocktail of chemicals that attracts predatory insects to come and eliminate the pests. When the same plant faces attack from caterpillars, it produces a completely different set of chemical signals that recruit different predators specialized in hunting those particular threats. The plant's chemical vocabulary allows it to call for exactly the type of help it needs in each situation. The sophistication extends even further. Plants can adjust the intensity and duration of their chemical signals based on the severity of the threat they face. A minor pest problem might elicit a brief, low-intensity chemical call for help. A major infestation triggers sustained, high-concentration alarm signals that can be detected across vast distances. The plants are essentially controlling the volume and urgency of their distress calls. Advanced imaging techniques are now allowing scientists to peer inside living plant cells and watch the molecular machinery of communication in action. Using fluorescent markers and high-resolution microscopy, researchers can observe in real time as chemical signals trigger precise cellular responses within seconds of being received. These cellular-level observations reveal that plant communication operates with a precision that rivals the most sophisticated human technologies. When a chemical message arrives at a plant cell, it binds to specific receptor proteins that immediately trigger cascades of molecular events. Gene expression patterns change, enzyme systems activate, and the cell's entire biochemistry reorganizes to respond appropriately to the incoming information. The speed of these responses defies the old stereotypes about slow, passive plant behavior. Plants can begin producing defensive compounds within minutes of receiving chemical warnings from neighbors. They can adjust their growth patterns, modify their resource allocation, and coordinate their behavior with unprecedented efficiency once they receive appropriate environmental information. But perhaps the most remarkable discovery has been the development of plant-computer interfaces that allow researchers to translate plant electrical signals into digital information. These systems reveal that plants are constantly generating complex patterns of electrical activity that correspond to their internal states and their responses to environmental conditions. Imagine being able to listen in on a plant's electrical thoughts. Researchers have developed sensors so sensitive they can detect the tiny electrical impulses that travel through plant tissues as the organisms process information about their environment. These bioelectric signals follow patterns that mirror the neural activity seen in animal nervous systems, suggesting that plants and animals may share more fundamental similarities in how they process information than previously imagined. The plant-computer interfaces allow researchers to monitor these electrical patterns continuously, creating real-time readouts of plant responses to everything from changes in light levels to the approach of insects to the presence of beneficial fungi in the soil. Some researchers have even succeeded in using plant electrical signals to control robotic systems, essentially allowing plants to operate machines through their bioelectric activity. These technological advances are revealing that plants possess sensory capabilities that far exceed anything we previously imagined. Plants can detect magnetic fields, monitor atmospheric pressure changes, sense seismic vibrations, and even respond to gravitational anomalies. Their sensory world is far richer and more complex than the limited range of stimuli that human senses can perceive. Consider the implications of magnetic field detection in plants. Research has shown that many species can sense the Earth's magnetic field and use this information for navigation and orientation. This magnetic sense may help explain how plants can coordinate their activities across large geographic areas, using the planet's magnetic field as a universal reference system for spatial organization. Plants' ability to detect atmospheric pressure changes allows them to anticipate weather patterns with remarkable accuracy. They can sense approaching storms days before human meteorologists detect them, beginning their protective responses long before dangerous conditions arrive. This biological weather forecasting system operates on principles we are only beginning to understand. Genetic analysis techniques are providing additional insights into the molecular basis of plant intelligence and communication. Scientists have discovered that plants share a surprising number of genes with animals, including many involved in information processing, sensory perception, and response coordination. These shared genetic elements suggest that the basic mechanisms of biological intelligence may be far more ancient and universal than previously thought. The discovery that plants produce neurotransmitter chemicals identical to those used in animal nervous systems has opened entirely new avenues of research. Dopamine, serotonin, and other molecules associated with animal cognition and emotion are found throughout the plant kingdom, often in concentrations that rival those seen in animal brains. While scientists are still working to understand exactly what roles these neurotransmitter-like chemicals play in plant behavior, their presence suggests that the biochemical foundations of intelligence may be deeply conserved across all life forms. Plants may be using molecular communication systems that are fundamentally similar to those that enable human consciousness and thought. Recent breakthroughs in artificial photosynthesis are demonstrating how understanding plant communication and intelligence can inspire revolutionary new technologies. By studying how plants coordinate their energy production and resource allocation through chemical signaling, engineers are developing solar energy systems that can adapt to changing conditions and optimize their performance automatically. These bio-inspired technologies go beyond simple mimicry of plant structures. They attempt to replicate the information processing capabilities that allow plants to make intelligent decisions about energy allocation, resource distribution, and environmental response. The result is artificial systems that can learn from experience, adapt to changing conditions, and coordinate their activities across large networks. Material scientists are developing self-healing materials based on plant cellular repair mechanisms. These biomimetic substances can detect damage, assess its severity, and initiate appropriate repair responses without external intervention. Like plants responding to injury, these materials use chemical signaling systems to coordinate healing processes across their entire structure. The convergence of satellite monitoring, molecular analysis, electrical recording, and genetic sequencing is creating an unprecedented window into the hidden world of plant intelligence. For the first time in human history, we can observe plant communication and decision-making across every scale, from individual molecules to entire ecosystems. What we are discovering is that plants have been operating sophisticated information networks for millions of years, processing environmental data, making collective decisions, and coordinating responses across scales that dwarf any human communication system. These biological networks demonstrate forms of distributed intelligence that computer scientists are only beginning to appreciate and attempt to replicate. The realization that we are surrounded by intelligent systems we never recognized is profoundly humbling. Every forest, every garden, every wild place where plants grow is filled with ongoing conversations, collaborative decision-making, and collective intelligence that has been operating beneath our awareness throughout human history. As our technological capabilities continue to advance, we are gaining access to forms of plant communication that operate on timescales and through channels that human senses cannot directly perceive. We are learning to decode chemical languages that have been evolving for hundreds of millions of years, to interpret electrical signals that coordinate plant behavior across vast networks, and to appreciate forms of biological intelligence that challenge our most basic assumptions about what it means to be smart, aware, and responsive in this world. The codes we are cracking reveal that the natural world operates according to principles of communication, cooperation, and collective intelligence that far exceed anything humans have achieved. Plants have been demonstrating distributed problem-solving, resource optimization, and adaptive learning on planetary scales since long before our species existed. As we continue to develop new technologies for understanding plant communication and intelligence, We are discovering that the green world around us is far more dynamic, responsive, and intelligent than we ever imagined. We are learning to listen to conversations that have been taking place all around us, in languages we are only now beginning to understand. The implications of these discoveries extend far beyond our scientific understanding of plants. They suggest new approaches to artificial intelligence, new strategies for environmental management, and new perspectives on what it means to live as part of an intelligent, interconnected biological community. The codes we are cracking are teaching us that intelligence, communication, and consciousness may be far more widespread in nature than we ever dared to imagine. As we stand at the threshold of a new era in our understanding of plant intelligence, we find ourselves confronting questions that challenge the very foundations of how we think about consciousness, intelligence, and life itself. The discoveries we have explored together, from ancient cyanobacteria, learning to eat sunlight, to modern forests, coordinating their activities through vast underground networks, have revealed that intelligence in nature takes forms far more diverse and sophisticated than we ever imagined. But these revelations are only the beginning. The biggest mysteries about plant consciousness and cognition still await us, hidden in the green world that surrounds us every day. Consider what we have learned about plant behavior that suggests forms of consciousness beyond our current scientific understanding. Plants exhibit what appears to be anticipatory behavior, preparing for future events that have not yet occurred. They demonstrate what seems to be intentional action, making choices that require weighing multiple factors and selecting optimal strategies from available alternatives. They show evidence of what could be described as emotional responses, with their behavior influenced by internal states that change based on their experiences and environment. Yet we have no framework for understanding how consciousness might emerge from biological systems that lack centralized brains. If plants can experience their world in ways that matter to them, if they can suffer and thrive, remember and anticipate, desire and fear, then we are confronting forms of awareness that operate according to principles we have yet to discover. Recent research hints at even more profound mysteries. Scientists have documented plant behaviors that suggest they may experience something analogous to sleep, with their electrical activity following circadian rhythms that mirror the brainwave patterns seen in sleeping animals. Some plants appear to dream, exhibiting complex electrical activity during their rest periods that resembles the neural activity associated with dreaming in mammals. What might plants dream about? Perhaps they replay the day's experiences, processing information about threats encountered and resources discovered. Perhaps they rehearse future growth strategies, mentally exploring different possibilities for expanding their reach and influence. Or perhaps plant dreams are something entirely beyond our capacity to imagine, forms of experience so alien to our animal consciousness that we lack the concepts to even begin to understand them. The implications of these discoveries extend far beyond botany, into the realm of fundamental questions about the nature of consciousness itself. If awareness can emerge from the distributed networks of plant tissues, what does this tell us about the relationship between physical structure and subjective experience? Traditional neuroscience has assumed that consciousness requires the complex, centralized processing power of a brain. But plants demonstrate that sophisticated information processing, learning, and adaptive behavior can emerge from entirely different types of biological architectures. This revelation opens new avenues for understanding consciousness in all its forms. Perhaps awareness is not something that requires a specific type of neural organization, but rather an emergent property of any sufficiently complex information processing system. If this is true, then consciousness might be far more widespread in nature than we have ever suspected, not just in plants, but potentially in any biological system capable of sophisticated information, integration, and response. Future research will likely reveal new principles of biological organization that apply across all living systems, from bacterial colonies to human cities. The distributed intelligence we see in plant networks may provide insights into how collective consciousness emerges from the activities of individual components working together toward common goals. These discoveries could revolutionize our understanding of everything, from artificial intelligence to social organization to the nature of life itself. Climate change is creating natural laboratories where we can observe plant adaptation and evolution in real time. As environmental conditions shift rapidly across the globe, plants are demonstrating remarkable abilities to modify their behavior, physiology, and even their genetic expression in response to new challenges. Some species are developing new survival strategies within decades rather than the millennia typically required for evolutionary change. These rapid adaptations suggest that plant intelligence includes capabilities for innovation and creativity that we have only begun to appreciate. Plants are not just responding to environmental changes, they are experimenting with new solutions, testing different strategies, and learning from both success and failure at unprecedented speeds. We are witnessing evolution in action as plant communities develop new forms of cooperation, communication, and collective problem-solving in response to rapidly changing conditions. Emerging technologies will soon allow us to eavesdrop on plant conversations with unprecedented precision and detail. Advanced sensors capable of detecting individual molecules will enable us to decode the complete chemical vocabularies that plants use to communicate. Real-time monitoring systems will allow us to follow plant thoughts and decisions as they unfold, watching the biological equivalent of neural activity as plants process information and coordinate their responses. Perhaps most intriguingly, we may soon develop technologies that enable two-way communication between human and plant intelligence. If we can learn to speak the chemical languages that plants use to share information, we might be able to engage in actual conversations with trees, flowers, and crops. Imagine being able to ask a plant about its needs, its experiences, and its perceptions of the world around it. Such communication would fundamentally transform our relationship with the natural world. We would no longer be passive observers of plant life, but active participants in the conversations that shape ecosystems. We could learn directly from plants about optimal agricultural practices, environmental management strategies, and sustainable living approaches that work with natural systems rather than against them. The study of plant intelligence is also inspiring revolutionary advances in artificial intelligence and computing. Traditional AI systems are based on centralized processing models that mirror animal brain organization, but plant-inspired AI systems operate according to distributed intelligence principles, with processing power spread across networks of simple components that work together to achieve complex goals. These bio-inspired technologies demonstrate remarkable capabilities for adaptation, resilience, and collective problem-solving. Like plant networks, they can continue functioning even when individual components fail. They can adapt to changing conditions without central control, and they can exhibit emergent behaviors that exceed the capabilities of their individual parts. Future AI systems may increasingly resemble plant intelligence rather than animal cognition, with distributed processing networks that can grow, adapt, and reorganize themselves in response to new challenges. These systems could revolutionize everything, from environmental monitoring to resource management to space exploration, providing technological capabilities that mirror the sophisticated intelligence we observe in natural plant communities. The greatest questions about plant consciousness remain tantalizingly beyond our current understanding. Do plants experience pain when they are injured? Do they feel pleasure when they receive needed nutrients or water? Do they experience something analogous to longing when they reach toward light or search for resources? Do they mourn when neighboring plants die, or celebrate when new individuals join their community? These questions push us to the very limits of what science can currently investigate. We have sophisticated tools for measuring plant behavior, detecting their electrical activity, and analyzing their chemical communications. But we have no instruments that can directly measure subjective experience or determine whether the complex information processing we observe in plants is accompanied by any form of inner awareness. Yet the mounting evidence suggests that something resembling consciousness may indeed exist throughout the plant kingdom. The learning abilities, memory formation, decision-making capabilities, and sophisticated communication systems we have documented all point toward forms of plant experience that matter to the organisms themselves. Plants behave as if their activities are guided by preferences, goals, and responses to their environment that suggest some form of subjective experience. As we look toward the future of plant intelligence research, we can anticipate discoveries that will continue to challenge our assumptions about consciousness, intelligence, and life itself. We may discover that communication between plants operates on scales and through channels we have not yet imagined. We may find that plant memory systems can store information for centuries or even millennia, allowing trees to remember events from long before any living human was born. We may learn that plant communities can engage in forms of collective decision-making that rival or exceed the capabilities of human societies. We may discover that the intelligence we observe in individual plants is just the tip of an iceberg, with ecosystem-level intelligence emerging from the interactions of countless plant and fungal networks spanning entire continents. The implications of these discoveries for our relationship with the natural world are profound. If plants are truly intelligent beings capable of experience, suffering, and awareness, then our ethical responsibilities toward them take on new dimensions. How we treat forests, how we practice agriculture, and how we manage natural resources all become questions with moral implications we have never before considered. But perhaps the most important lesson from our exploration of plant intelligence is the recognition that we live in a world far richer, more complex, and more alive than we ever imagined. The trees in our forests, the flowers in our gardens, and the crops in our fields are not passive objects but active participants in the ongoing conversation of life on Earth. They are teachers who can show us new ways of thinking about cooperation, communication, and community. They are innovators who have been solving complex problems for millions of years. They are companions who share our planet and our future, working toward goals that ultimately benefit all life. The green minds that surround us hold secrets about the nature of intelligence that may ultimately help us understand our own consciousness and our place in the larger community of life. As we continue to explore the mysteries of plant cognition, we are not just learning about plants, we are discovering new possibilities for what it means to be intelligent, aware, and alive in this remarkable universe. The future of plant intelligence research promises revelations that will continue to transform our understanding of life itself. We stand at the beginning of a new age of discovery, one that will reveal forms of consciousness and intelligence throughout the natural world that we have only first begun to imagine. The plants around us, silent partners in the great adventure of life on Earth, are waiting to share their ancient wisdom with anyone curious enough to listen. Their secrets are still being revealed, their languages still being decoded, their remarkable capabilities still being discovered. The greatest mysteries about plant intelligence lie not in the past but in the future, waiting for the next generation of researchers, brave enough to question everything we think we know about consciousness, intelligence, and the nature of life itself. In the end, the study of plant intelligence teaches us that we are not alone in our capacity for thought, feeling, and awareness. We share this world with countless other forms of consciousness, each contributing to the rich tapestry of intelligence that makes our planet unique in the known universe. The green future that awaits us promises discoveries that will forever change how we understand ourselves and our relationship with the living world that sustains us all.